How did the Crafts deal with the heart-in-the-mouth moments along their journey? In this lesson, you will learn to understand a character by analyzing the character's actions and reactions. Let's review. In this lesson, we're going to be trying to understand characters. In a fiction text, the characters are people or animals who are not real, but are made up in the imagination of the author. The author decides what the character will look like and act like. In an informational text, the characters are real people who the story is about. These characters have their own personality. The author doesn't get to make it up. In either fiction or informational text, it's the author's job to develop the characters so that we as readers feel like we know them personally. We've been reading the text The Great Escape from Slavery of Ellen and William Craft by Marion Smith Holmes. This is an informational text that tells the story of William and Ellen Craft and their escape from slavery. Let's zoom in on this paragraph of the introduction. Despite the luxury accommodations, the journey was fraught with narrow escapes and heart-in-the-mouth moments that could have led to their discovery and capture. These heart-in-the-mouth moments are the basis for the question we are trying to answer. We'll use these 3 steps to answer the question and to better understand the characters. First, we'll locate challenging situations. Next, we'll ask, how did the character respond? And finally, we'll ask ourselves, what did this reaction tell me about the character? Here's the question we want to answer. How did the Crafts deal with the heart-in-the-mouth moments along their journey? Our first step is to locate challenging situations. Since we've read this text before, let's look ahead to where the Crafts actually begin the journey. The first sentence of the last paragraph of page 2 says, at the Macon train station, so this must be the place where they started. At the Macon train station, Ellen purchased tickets to Savannah, 200 miles away. As William took a place in the Negro car, he spotted the owner of the cabinet-making shop on the platform. So already the Crafts are running into a challenge. They're just barely on the train, and William sees his boss from the cabinet-making shop. And now that we've located a challenging situation, our second step is to ask, how did the character respond? So let's read on. After questioning the ticket seller, the man began peering through the windows of the cars. William turned his face from the window and shrank in his seat, expecting the worst. So, how did William respond to seeing his boss? Well, the text says that he turned his face from the window and shrank in his seat and expected the worst. He didn't panic, but it does say he was expecting the worst. So outwardly, he just turned away from the window and shrank in his seat. The third step is to ask ourselves, what does this reaction tell me about the character? Well, it tells me that William knew the risk of getting caught, but he was willing to risk it anyway. He was afraid, but brave, and determined enough to stay calm. Let's go to the next paragraph. Ellen, who had been staring out the window, then turned away and discovered that her seatmate was a dear friend of her master, a recent dinner guest who had known Ellen for years. Wow, another close call with being caught, and they just left the station. The person sitting right next to Ellen had known her for years. So how did Ellen respond? Let's read on. Her first thought was that he had been sent to retrieve her, but the wave of fear soon passed when he greeted her with, "It is a very fine morning, sir." To avoid talking to him, Ellen feigned deafness for the next several hours. So, her first thought was that he'd been sent to retrieve her. And to avoid talking to him, she faked deafness for the next several hours. So, she thinks he's there for her. So what does this reaction tell me about the character? Well, since her first thought was that he was there to take her back, I think like William, she knew the risk of this escape and was afraid, but brave enough to control her fear. I also think Ellen was smart and a quick thinker to come up with the idea of pretending to be deaf. Another challenge comes in paragraph 5. Baltimore, the last major stop before Pennsylvania, a free state, had a particularly vigilant border patrol. Ellen and William were again detained, asked to leave the train and report to the authorities for verification of ownership. So the Crafts were asked to leave the train and report to the authorities. They had made it all this way, and right now, before the Pennsylvania, a free state, they were asked to leave the train. So how did the Crafts respond to this challenge? Well, William's quote says, "We felt as though we had come into deep waters and were about being overwhelmed." So that tells me they were being frightened. Their inward reaction was to be afraid and overwhelmed, thinking the worst again. But outwardly they silently prayed. So they were afraid, they thought they were being returned, but they prayed. So what does this response tell me about the Crafts? Well, this reaction makes me understand how desperate they must have been to make it to freedom. Here they were at the last stop between slavery and freedom, and they could do nothing but pray. This makes me think they must have had a very strong faith to put their hopes into a prayer. So let's take a look at what we've noticed about the characters by looking at all the sticky notes that we wrote. This will make it easier to see all my thinking so that I can answer the question. The first sticky note was about William's response to his boss looking in the windows. And the second sticky note was about Ellen's response to her master's friend being her seatmate. And then the third note was about both William and Ellen's response to being asked to leave the train. I see some common character traits like risk-taker and afraid but brave. I'll definitely mention that in my answer. Even though the Crafts were afraid as they faced many hard-in-the-mouth moments, they were brave and determined throughout their journey. Both William and Ellen thought they were going to be caught and returned. But they were so desperate, they were willing to take the risks for freedom. They made it through the challenges with quick thinking and their strong faith. These are the steps we followed. First, we located challenging situations. Next, we asked, how did the character respond? And last, we asked, what does this reaction tell me about the character? In this lesson, you have learned to understand a character by analyzing the character's actions and reactions.